Welcome to the live meditation. We are going to have periods of silence, which of course are the essence of the meditation. And your practice is especially during the periods of silence, not to drift off into mental noise. In other words, thinking, because then there's no more silence. So during the silent periods, where's your attention if it's not in thinking? Well, on the one hand, of course your attention is in the visual perception and as well the auditory perception. And to perceive visually through the eyes and through the ears. Of course, you don't need conceptual thinking. You perceive very clearly, not through thinking anymore, because there's nothing to think about here, not really. You perceive through presence. The background of presence, consciousness itself. So you're aware of the two dimensions, the perceptions, and the consciousness, which is yourself, that makes the perception possible. The awareness of that consciousness is a very subtle thing. You might ask, how can I be aware of being conscious? But to give any answer to how would be a little misleading, because any technique would come in between you and that awareness. The awareness is so obvious that all it needs is a redirecting of attention to it. Consciousness, which before went out continuously into sense perceptions and thinking, now, although there are still sense perceptions, consciousness redirects its attention to itself. self-awareness, self-realization. Because consciousness is who or what you are. Does this meditation help you with your problems? Because a lot of the compulsive thinking is to do with thinking about your problems. There's never a time when there are not problems, and at certain times there are more problems than at other times, but there's always new problems. What's the connection between us here and the world of your problems, which your mind tells you is what really matters? That needs to be sorted out. But if you've lived for long enough, you know that once you have sorted out, if that's even possible, your present problems, new ones arise. If you think there shouldn't be any problems in your life, you're in for a lot of frustration. So there are always problems. What can change is the so-called problems can be seen from a deeper, wider perspective. First, you know there are always problems. That's good. And then you discover there's a space in you that's not affected by problems. And that's why we're here, to find that space that is deeper than the person. Because a lot of the person consists of the person's problems. That's the person's identity. So discovering that space within you that is deeper than the problems and deeper than mind activity. There's a peace and a stillness that can be accessed at any moment. And then the so-called problems of your life can be seen against that deeper space within you. And that dimension, there are no problems there, just an awareness. Sometimes that awareness can come, the awareness of the ultimately relative unimportance of your problems can sometimes come to you when you realize that in a few years you'll be dead. And with you, your problems will also be dead. A few years means anything between 1 and 60 or 70 years. So it can happen that when you really become aware that in a few years you and your problems will be dead, you become aware of something deeper in you. Which of course we are here to access as we sit here together. And the change that then happens is that your problems no longer have the power to create deep disturbances in you. Maybe some ripples, yes, little waves here and there. But you discover a core that is not disturbed. And then you deal with your problems to the extent that they can be dealt with, which are really ultimately only situations. No longer through the disturbance that they caused in you. Because if you deal with problems through the disturbance that they caused in you, you're on the level of problems and your dealing with the problems creates further problems. Because you're a disturbed person trying to solve his or her problems. And a disturbed person cannot not create further problems. But if you deal with your problems through a basic core of peace or stillness, then the problems lose their heaviness. They are no longer of absolute importance. And what then happens is they cease to be problems. They're situations. You deal with them through your inner core of peace, or you just accept them and wait for them to change. Either or. But that shift in consciousness in you changes how you experience your life. It changes also the impact you have on the world. From being a contributing factor to the world's problems to embodying the ultimate solution to the world's problems. That does not mean that the world will no longer be challenging. But the challenges of the world, which before were regarded as problems, are then even welcomed, because it's part of the dynamic nature of sense-perceived existence. The dance of form. And of course, an amazing realization is that what we call conventionally problems doesn't even exist in the present moment itself. When you remove time, you also remove the problem. What's left is situations. Check this for yourself. At this moment, what's your problem? Where is your problem in this moment? That question is because you obviously see that there is no problem at this moment. You can't find it unless you start thinking about it. But it's not here, it's just a thought, movement of thought. That's an amazing, that takes you immediately to the deeper dimension, the transcendent dimension. Your problems exist in time, but not in the now. If you're never aware of the now, then you're always aware only of your problems. Be aware of the now, and you wake up into the now, and then you look around for your problems, and you don't see any. Nor do you hear them, nor do you experience them in any way at this moment, unless you start thinking about them, which of course is past and future. That's where time arises. It's not a denial, it's a realization. And it's not saying you don't do things, don't take action anymore. No, it's realizing that at the deepest level, there are no problems as such. Challenges, yes. So when I say there will always be problems, what I mean is there will always be challenges. When there's a shift of consciousness in you, then the challenges no longer turn into massive problems. And create a heaviness in your life that detracts from your sense of aliveness and makes you miserable and creates a heavy sense of me, self, a miserable self. And then you carry that around with you. Dreadful burden to live with a miserable self. And of course the miserable self blames the outside world and other people for its so-called problems. So if you are a miserable self at this moment, go deeper and find a place in you that is more real than that. That's why we're here. The challenges of life have a useful function. They wake you up. But that could take time, because as long as you're unconscious, the challenges of life make you miserable. But as consciousness awakens, the moment the awakening process begins, and it has for all of you, it has begun, otherwise you would not be here, then any further challenges wake you up. And can take you to a more real place, give you more depth. And ultimately dissolve the self, the pseudo-self. present moment. No past, no future, just this. And immediately you go deeper. Of course, what we are talking about here and practicing and living is discovering the transcendent dimension to your life. Without that, you are stuck with yourself. And that's not pleasant. Anybody who has not found the transcendent dimension to their lives is basically unhappy. Except when you're very young, life gives you, for a while, a credit of aliveness. You can live on that for a few years when you're still very young. You get a sense of aliveness, even without the transcendent dimension. And then that credit gets exhausted eventually. And then increasingly your life turns miserable, stressful. When you're very young, you can just go to another party and, okay, having a great time. And then it wears off after a few years. So you can look into the eyes of a young child and see intense aliveness there. But if you look into the eyes of an old person and you see intense aliveness there, then it means the transcendent dimension is present. Otherwise, the old person will be dull and lifeless because he or she has been feeling miserable for the past 40 years. So our meditation today, as you have noticed, has been a coming together of words and silence, form and formlessness. And that's how your life can also be. Continuing awareness of the deeper space of presence or stillness. It's the formless dimension. Daily life is a little bit more challenging than sitting here, because the words, the form, here are helpful because they point back to the formless. Form pointing towards the formless, whereas in ordinary life, form, which is whatever happens outside, and your thoughts that arise, they have a seductive quality. They pull your attention totally in. That's what they try to do. They don't point you necessarily back to the formless. So that's your job, is to stay rooted there. Every single human who is engaged in this transformation of consciousness on the planet is helpful to every other who is engaged in it. That's why it's wonderful to be here together at this time. So you're being helped by many that you never even meet on the level of form. And you are helping others whom you may never even meet on the level of form.